You mentioned two different kinds of fats, bad and good.
Well, it's more nuanced than that. It's subcutaneous fat is the fat most of us think about, right? If I lift my shirt up and you pinch a little fat on my belly, that's subcutaneous fat. It's fat that is stored in a part of the body, believe it or not, where we were designed to store fat. And I think this is hard for people to understand, but you have to take an evolutionary lens to appreciate it. The ability to store fat is a very good thing. If we didn't have that capacity, if we all had conditions called lipodystrophies, which is a medical term for people who can't store fat, our species wouldn't be here. So there'd be a bunch of amoeba doing this podcast right now, and it wouldn't be very good because they wouldn't have brains the same as ours. So only because we could store fat could we, as a species, directionally, like 250,000 to 500,000 years ago, kind of really start to showcase our capacity as the superior species on this earth. And the reason for that is our brains are so energy demanding. So all of us are sitting in this room right now. Our brains are consuming 25% of our total calories.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Think about that for a second. So if you eat 3,000 calories a day, what is that? 750 of those calories are just going to your brain. The thing weighs 2% of your body weight and consumes 25% of your energy. And that's why we have the brain that we do. That's why we are sitting here doing a podcast and not rummaging around in the dirt. But that comes at a very high cost. And the cost is we can never be without energy. And that's why our bodies evolved to store energy. And we really only store it in the form of fat. You can only store about a day's worth of glucose, and we don't store protein. So up until a couple hundred years ago, this capacity to store fat was amazing. It's really only in the modern world where food is so abundant that the need to carry enough energy to survive for 2 weeks without food was no longer a liability. And now most of us have the opposite problem, which is we're storing too much energy. But to go back to your question, only when the fat leaves these subcutaneous areas and goes into other areas, and the big ones are into the muscle itself. So if you look at ever see like a Wagyu steak, how it's like fat is marbling inside the muscle?
Sure.
Well, we do that too. And that's really problematic. That's what leads to insulin resistance, which I'm sure we'll talk about. If the fat starts to surround the organs in your body, if the fat builds up inside your liver, inside your pancreas, around your heart, now the fat is very problematic. It starts to release inflammatory cytokines. That's the type of fat that actually leads to heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, all these things.
And what are the main reasons the fat would start to go into those areas?
Yeah, awesome question. It basically is a genetic issue. So everybody has a different capacity for how much fat they store. And so I'll give you one very obvious genetic difference is Asian to Caucasian. So specifically Asian to Northern European descent. You probably notice, or maybe you've heard the term skinny fat, right?
Sure.
That you will see that used to describe Asian populations where they don't really, an Asian person who's metabolically unhealthy doesn't necessarily get fat. They'll just get type 2 diabetes, but on the outside, they'll actually look normal. And the reason is they just don't genetically have the capacity to store as much excess energy. So they'll very quickly go from energy appropriate to energy abundance, but you won't see it. Whereas people of Northern European ancestry can get a lot fatter first, and believe it or not, initially stay reasonably healthy metabolically as they do. So the analogy I use in my book is a bathtub. And different people have different sized bathtubs. So a really big bathtub is a person who could get really, really fat, meaning lots of water could get into that bathtub and not cause trouble until at some point it overflows and then water leaks on the floor, and that's problematic.
Yeah, I remember reading in your book, you wrote about this, where it's not necessarily someone, if you look at someone aesthetically and they're big, that doesn't mean they're necessarily unhealthy compared to somebody who's not. And it comes down to this issue. Is there a reason why people of Asian descent, based on genetics, have more of that issue than a Caucasian?
I can speculate, but it would be nothing more than speculation. I would assume that it might have to do with the fact that people of Northern European descent, there would have been another advantage to accumulating excess fat, for example, for warmth. and maybe people of Asian descent, it would not have been an evolutionary advantage to create such insulation. So in other words,
sense.
maybe there was another advantage beyond the energetic one. Maybe there was an insulation one as well.